All right, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Friday, July 18th, and maybe we can start with the Middle East today. There's been stuff going on in Syria. Can you just start us off with that? What's happening in Syria?
Yeah, in southern Syria, where the Druze ethnic and religious minority is concentrated, fighting broke out, and there have clearly been atrocities. There are a lot of videos out there actually that record these atrocities, and I haven't seen them. I've been advised against seeing them because they're really horrible. That's what I've heard. It's just you won't sleep at night if you watch them. I know there was an attack, for example, on a hospital that was largely Druze, and doctors were killed, patients were killed in their beds. The horrible, horrible stuff. Now, this is similar to what we saw, of course, in coastal Syria. Those were largely directed against Alawites, but also Christians there, and that attracted some attention, but not even hand-wringing from the West. It was just sort of, if it was covered, it was always given a certain spin. Oh, these are Assad loyalists. It's probably all their fault, that kind of thing. Now, in this case, Israel has intervened as a result of it. They, after these atrocities occurred, they actually declared. Well, first of all, they did attack, I believe, some military convoys. The units that are carrying out these atrocities are these militias, which often the government of Al Jalani or Al Shara says, well, these are not us. We don't have them under. They're not under our control. But clearly, I think they're complicit. I'll just give you an example. Earlier those atrocities were in coastal Syria were carried out by these militias, and it's clear who did it because a lot of them took selfies. They were proud of what they did. The government knows who they are. The government afterwards, under a certain amount of pressure, from the so-called international community, declared that they would conduct an investigation, created a committee. But that was, 4 months ago, and nothing has happened. And the same people basically are now killing Druze in southern Syria. Now,
Who are these people that are killing the Druze? Are they fellow Syrians?
well, some of them are, but a lot of them are not Syrians. They can be Chechens and, even Uyghurs. It's part of this international jihadist, mercenaries, people who many of them are, former members of the Islamic State or Al Qaeda. And of course, Jilani himself was both of those things. He was a leader of ISIS and of Al Qaeda, which was rebranded as Al Nusra in Syria. But yeah, I think the majority of them are in fact not even Syrians.
So I guess the big question is, why would Israel intervene? I mean, if you look at X, Twitter, all the Zionist shills are saying that, oh, this is for humanitarian reasons because, Israel just hates violence and bloodshed to civilians, and they're just trying to save all these innocent people. So that's why we have to intervene to stop a genocide. So that's what they're pushing. Like, we are the defenders of Islamic terrorism, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah, defenders against Islamic
terrorism. Oh yeah, sorry. Right, yeah. Right. So why? Right. What's what's Israel's
that's
plan?
Absurd. That's just so completely absurd that I'm not going to even really try to refute that because I think we all know that's absurd. That claim about a humanitarian concerns. It's a geopolitical. It's a calculation, and I think clearly they want to. They have already, invaded southern Syria. They took the Golan Heights in the 1967 war, and then after the fall of Assad, they entered. They expanded from there and took more territory, including very important territory. Really the commanding heights, you could say, the highest mountains in Syria, and gained control of Syria's main source of water. So something like 40% of the water that Syrians use, or maybe even more, and also the Lebanese. They gained control of that. So, these are this is strategic territory that they gained. And they advanced towards Damascus. I believe they got within maybe 30 miles south of Damascus. So they have direct control over a portion of southern Syrian territory. And they had, there had been talk about creating buffer zones. I think there actually have been announcements, that we considered this a buffer zone, meaning that, okay, we won't control it directly, but we're not going to allow any other power to intervene here. And there was, we'll get into this later. So, clearly they had an interest in controlling much of southern Syria. And I think you could say this is part of the greater Israel project. There are a lot of Israelis who are looking beyond historical Palestine, beyond Gaza and the West Bank, and they have these maps that show a greater Israel. I don't know exactly what it's based on, maybe certain biblical references, and it clearly extends into. It includes much of Syria. Let's put it that way. So the Israelis have their eye on that territory, and I believe they see the Druze as possibly very useful proxies, or people that could cooperate in their control of southern Syria. And historically, okay, there's been a kind of a mixed relationship between Israel and the Druze. I believe the Druze in Lebanon have actually been cooperating with the Israelis for a long time. Now, the Druze in the Golan Heights have not. I remember actually visiting the Golan Heights back in 2011 and meeting with a Druze leader, not me personally, but our group. And I found the whole thing, the presentation, very, very interesting. And I remember, too, there's this map that showed the Golan Heights as a part of Syria. And they clearly were very, very, pro-Assad, and they wanted to be back in Syria. They wanted Israel to withdraw from the Golan Heights, as they were, required to do so by international law, but they never did, of course. So there are many Druze that are anti-Israel, anti-Zionist. I suspect the majority are, but there are some that have cooperated with the Israelis historically, including Druze within the state of Israel. Some of them actually, are conscripted, or they serve in the IDF and have, fought on the IDF side. I think that's, again, a minority, but that's there. They've had some success in gaining cooperation among the Druze, and I think they see an opportunity, while the Druze are under these subjected to these horrific attacks, to declare themselves a protector of the Druze. And I think that explains the attack that Israel launched on the defense ministry in the presidential palace. I don't know if you've seen the video, but it's very dramatic. It was we're talking about, a very significant strike. These were, I don't know exactly what missiles the Israelis used, but they had very powerful warheads. It was right there in the center of Damascus, and just huge explosions, really very serious damage was done to these key buildings. So they struck the center of Syrian power. And they said they did it on behalf of the Druze. And, I'm not quite sure why they did that, because that's a huge escalation. And it, went right to, it was an attack on al-Jolani, who supposedly they were working out some sort of deal with, and he's been bent over backwards to be accommodating to the Israelis.
Right.
So it is something of a mystery, but, maybe it's simply a matter of trying to endear themselves to the Druze. Say, look what we're doing for you. And then if they can gain their cooperation and, and the Druze submit, clearly there are some Druze leaders that have asked for Israeli requests, I think minor ones, but most of them have said we don't want it. But they think that maybe they can win them over and they can use them as useful proxies and, gain control. They've done similar things, of course, like with the Kurds. The Kurds in northwestern Iraq and in northeastern Syria. And so the Kurds have actually become very, very useful to them. They've posed as their protectors against their ethnic rivals. And I think that's the hope right here, that they can use them, and then that way they can actually extend their control over all of southern Syria, and possibly, there's talk about creating what they call a David's corridor. It's a belt of land that goes along Syria's border with Jordan and then with Iraq. And it would extend all the way up to that northeastern part that is currently under American and Kurdish control. So they would have, that way they would have a, direct access to Iraq. And it's a part of Iraq, we're talking about northwestern Iraq that's Kurdish and where the Israelis already have penetrated, where, the central Iraqi authorities have only very limited control. So anyway, that's, I think, is part of this greater Israel project and using the Druze, at least in, in the short term or medium term as proxies in carrying out this project.
It still doesn't make much sense in terms of a geopolitical calculation because, like you said, al-Jawlani was being accommodating to the Israelis. I mean, they got rid of Assad. This was their dream, and Syria was essentially neutered. It's descended into lawlessness, sectarian violence. We have this puppet that's in charge, and from my understanding, al-Jawlani was even willing to give the Golan Heights to Israel, just like you can take it, no longer part of Syria. So why do something so extreme like bombing the presidential palace, bombing the Ministry of Defense in the middle of the day? Like if you wanted to neutralize them, okay, I mean, bombing the Ministry of Defense, that's like bombing the Pentagon, right, of a country. That's their headquarters.
Right.
And you do it in the middle of the day, maximize civilian casualties when these buildings are full of people. Like if you're really just saying that you're going to protect the Druze, this doesn't seem to make sense to me. Why would you do this? This might have a unifying effect. Everybody sees what you've done. Like we know who did this. Israel, are people celebrating in Syria that like hurrah, or that this is a great thing, right? It's going to anger all the Syrians and probably unite them against Israel, right?
Right. Well, I don't know that it'll go that far. I mean, it's just that Syria is so seriously fractured at this point that I don't think that we're going to see Syria united in any meaningful way. Yeah, I'm kind of surprised by it, I'll be honest. And I looked at many different sources to find an adequate explanation, and I really haven't. So it's something of a mystery. It seems to be a mystery to most people. The only thing is the declared reason for it, and apparently the proximate cause was the attacks on the Druze in Southern Syria. Now, it just seems like it's more than was necessary. Again, going straight to the Ministry of Defense and the center of Syrian power, so to speak. There are even reports that, I'll just call him al-Jawlani, that he fled to Idlib, which is in the northwestern province where he was hanging out for years before he led these militias into Damascus and declared the new government. And again, the reports are that he feared that they were actually trying to assassinate him, which seems strange. I don't really know what's going on. I mean, there's something going on behind the scenes here. Again, it does seem, okay, yeah, I understand why they're trying to endear themselves to the Druze. That does make sense. That's something that had been going on before, but it just seems like such a huge escalation and beyond what's necessary that could have repercussions that maybe wouldn't be good for Israel. So I don't know. There must be something else, that we don't see here, and nobody seems to really understand what it is. I've gone to a lot of different Syrian experts.
Yeah, well, it completely undermines sort of the legitimacy of al-Jawlani. If he, like he was the one that was sort of working with the Israelis, promised to give the Golan Heights, and then this happens. Israel does this to him. I mean, we were already saying that his grip on power is already tenuous. And if the Israelis are turning on him, I thought this was their man, right? I mean, wasn't that?
Well, yeah. Well, I think in the end, it's just like he's Al-Qaeda, he's ISIS. And again, Israel and the U.S. have worked with these forces in the past. But I think it's a mistake to think that they're truly allied, like they're actually friends. They say we can use them. He maybe the way they look at it is that, okay, he achieved our objective. He overthrew Assad. As now Syria is broken and it's never going to be put back together again. But he's not our friend. And, we don't care if... I don't know exactly why they would want to take him out because he's so ineffectual, really. But But yeah, here we have it. Now, as far as like there were those rumors that there was going to be a deal in which he recognized the annexation of the Golan Heights. Um, they say, oh yeah, that's good, but they don't care. They've had the Golan Heights since 1967. They de facto own it, and they want to expand. I mean, maybe the problem with the deal, it would actually limit their. Again, Israel seems never wants to have permanent borders. You don't want to really have a deal. They like to always keep these things open, so there's always the opportunity for further expansion. And they may just say, we don't need a deal with this guy because we can just take it. And we already have taken, some, and we're going to take more. And we'll just do it our own way through military power. That's our preferred way of doing things.
I don't understand this obsession with this expansion and to create greater Israel. It's just not, it's such an ambitious project. That's just not possible. I mean, you don't have enough Jewish people to occupy all those lands to begin with to even create greater Israel. So, and right now, there's just so many problems that Israel has. It just seems crazy to try to open up another front and to expand and to move on.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. It seems like it's overly ambitious. But again, look at the people that are close to Netanyahu and himself. They do have this vision of greater Israel, and they feel like they're on a roll, and nobody can defeat them. So, I think they've become increasingly cautious. I think one thing we may see, is, for example, we'll start to see settlements in Syrian territory. It might not happen right away, but, we may see that over the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, you think they're on a roll. I mean, they just got their butts handed to them by Iran, right? They should be, are we wrong in the amount of damage that Iran has inflicted upon Israel? I mean, I assumed it was pretty substantial, and we know that they called for the ceasefire. It just seems like you think that it just in their own interest, just pump the brakes a bit. Israel just like, but they just don't have any desire. They can't. Yeah, they can't go more than a day or two without bombing somebody or bombing a country. It's really they're so out of control. It's so out of control. I don't understand how you. I mean, what's Al-Jilani going to do? Should we be calling him Al-Jilani? What's his
Al-Shara?
Al-Shara. It's strange because it wasn't even like. I mean, when he first came into power, like 6 months ago, we had all these leaders from Europe come over, Macron, and saw Annalena Baerbock, she wouldn't shake her hand, but they're all there, like, congrats, congrats Al-Qaeda, ISIS, we did it, you're in power. And then Trump comes over, says he's a tough hombre, good guy. And now we do this, like, what is this? You know what I mean? What is this? What are we looking at? Is he just going to be disposed of now? I mean, I thought everybody, the Western world, was getting behind his back.
Yeah, well, they have. I mean, even recently, well, of course, the U.S., the Trump administration declared an end to the sanctions, and other European countries have done the same. So, yeah, I mean, Syria's being brought into the cold because now we have the right guy in power. So that does surprise me that the Israelis would go after the presidential palace and, would strike the presidential palace and the defense ministry because he has become, the acceptable face of Syria to the West. And, he's been very accommodating to the Israelis. But, we see Israel just doesn't seem to give a damn about all these things. I mean, they may be just looking at raw power terms. We can just take Southern Syria, and actually this guy offering us, remember, they often go after the people that try to negotiate with them because they don't want actually to have a negotiated settlement. He's willing to give them a lot, but then you have a negotiated settlement, then you're stuck with what you have. They much rather keep the pot boiling and the chaos going on and no negotiated settlement. And then they have all these wonderful excuses for just intervening further and taking more land. Maybe that's the calculation. It's as simple as that.
Well, he has to do something now, right? Al-Jilani.
Yeah, it's just it's not clear. One thing is that Syria has been greatly weakened. I mean, one thing we know, there was criticisms, for example, of Russia to certainly restricting use of their air defense systems. essentially, let's not shoot down Israeli planes that are in Israeli or I think Lebanese airspace. But it was overall it was quite effective. So from time to time the Israelis would strike a target, but it was clearly limited. They didn't have the over the anything like they didn't have air superiority in Syria itself. They had to steer clear of it. They had to be cautious. Now that's all gone. It's all gone now that that's Assad has fallen. It's gone, and the Israelis, if you remember, in the days after the fall of Assad, the days and weeks, they just methodically destroyed, took apart the military infrastructure that was in existence under Assad. And now this country is greatly weakened. It's partitioned, and even the part that still is under central government control, under Damascus's control, is greatly weakened. It's not, they just don't have, they have guerrillas that can kill civilians on the ground, but they can't really fight a war. And yeah, so anyway, the Israelis know it.
Why can't countries like Lebanon get air defense? I mean, it seems like they need it badly. I mean, Beirut gets bombed yearly, and
Right.
you're near a nation's capital. Like, how does that? Why can't they get it? If Syria was able to have some.
The central government in Lebanon is pretty much under Western, especially American control. In fact, like the Lebanese army, the army of the state of Lebanon is, I think, like half of its pay is funded by the U.S. And so the state of Lebanon is not going to get these things, these systems, right? Hezbollah, and I think maybe Hezbollah just doesn't have the means. It's a parastate militia. It doesn't. I don't think they can import, let's say, S-300s or something like that. These are large systems. They would have to. The state wouldn't allow them. Israel wouldn't let that happen. It's just like when they tried to. These are not things that can be smuggled across the border. That's what I'm guessing. Now, what surprises me about actually Hezbollah is that they didn't have drones, because we know drones are something. If they had tens of thousands of small drones, they could have done so much more, and they just didn't have them. And I think that was a serious mistake on their part. But I think it just was impossible for them to acquire the air defense systems.
Okay, so what's your sort of prediction for Syria? That it's just going to be balkanized, or do you think that there will be some kind of resistance movement that will form up organically through this? Well, I mean, these acts of aggression against Syria and their people, I mean, could this potentially unify? People realize, okay, well, we have one common enemy here. It's the country that keeps on bombing us.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is, these Sunni extremists that have taken charge of the government have been mistreating, and that's really too light a term to use. They've been, terribly abusing the very many, ethnic and religious minorities within Syria: the Christians, the Alawites, the Shia, the Druze. The Kurds are an ethnic minority. And so there's just no desire to rally to the central government's flag. All these people, by and large, hate the Israelis, but they know who's trying to kill them. They're not going to join their persecutors. It's just not going to happen.
I know, but it's just strange that the people that are going around, these Sunni extremists, it's like, I mean, well, why isn't I mean, is Israel taking these people out? I mean.
Some of them, yeah. I mean, some of them, like these recent. There was the attack on the defense ministry and the presidential palace, but there are also direct attacks on some of these militias. I don't know what the extent of it was, but there have been.
Right. So, I mean, if you're these Sunni extremists, they can't be wanting to work with Israel anymore. It's like, okay, who are the people that are killing you then? It's not the Druze or the Alawites. You're killing them.
Yeah.
and then the Israelis are the ones that might kill you. So why are they? You know what I mean? It's like, shouldn't you be like, okay, well,
Yeah.
let's
Well,
work on this enemy.
yeah.
You know,
Well, I mean, I
is just
think
their
it just tells
hatred
you,
for
yeah,
them?
yeah. Well, I
So
mean,
that
that's really what drives them. I mean, I think that's what we have to say. I mean, these are, um, I've heard them described as the worst people in the world. I think maybe they have some competitors there, uh, but yeah, they're driven by hate, and they take pleasure, as we saw those, the selfies there in the Alawite communities. They take pleasure in killing these people. They take pride in it, and these people by and large can't fight back. Now the Druze seem to be somewhat better armed and have put up some resistance. So we'll see what happens there. But they have done terrible things to the Druze as well. And then they have no love for the Israelis. I think if the Jews were as weak as these other groups, they would be killing them just the same. But the thing is, Israel's powerful, so that in their own interests, they have just avoided provoking Israel. But again, it looks like maybe it's not doing them a whole lot of good.
Okay, well, where do you see this all going? Do we see, Iran starting this back up again, or Israel is just going to continue to lash out until there's just some type of response from some power in the Middle East?
Yeah,
I just feel like this can't go on much longer, right?
Yeah. Well, it can go on for a while, I'm afraid. I mean, it's. I wish there was a response, but Turkey condemned it, but Turkey's still allowing the oil, that keeps Israel going. Erdogan he's not. He doesn't love Israel, but he loves Israel's money, and it's going to stay that way. And Jordan is weak, and the people are very unhappy what's happening, but they just have the government remains firmly in control. I mean, there's always a possibility that there will be some kind of revolution in a place like Jordan or Egypt, where there's a great deal of popular discontent. But these countries Egypt's very large, but it's very, very poor. Turkey's the only one that with a substantial military in the region, close to, other than Iran. And, but Erdogan, I don't have any faith that he's actually going to take a principled position and, intervene. And it's just not going to happen. He's going to continue to play this game of denouncing Israel and, providing them oil. I think that's what's going to happen. It's sad but true. I think that's just the way it is, and it's going to be that way for a while. Now, yeah, I think eventually, Israel may commit that, age-old error of imperial overreach in trying to, their effort to create a greater Israel, and they may pay the price at some point. But right now, their enemies are so weak. Their immediate neighbors, Syria, things look very, very different than they did just, like a year ago. Let's be honest. I mean, things have changed very much in their favor, and they're just moving into the vacuum. And I think probably we will see them carve out a Druze state that's subordinate to them in southern Syria, and then create this David's corridor that will connect southern Syria to northeastern Syria, where, of course, with the U.S., they control the territory and have an alliance with the Kurds.
Do you think Iran made a major mistake by agreeing to this ceasefire, this pause?
It's really hard to say. There's a very heavy fog of war. Clearly Israel was in trouble. I think there's no doubt about it. We're getting reports in the Western media that they were running out of interceptors, and when that happens, then Iran, it's not clear what percentage of Iranian missiles were being brought down, but there was some significant percentage that was being brought down by Israel. They did have some protection. It was a pretty good. Remember, it's not just their own; it was all these other countries helping them, and so altogether, they were able to bring down a significant percentage of Iranian missiles. But that gone, I mean, they would just be completely exposed, and they would really be pummeled. And then, Iran would have been able to start using drones, which are, again, much easier to shoot down. If you don't have any kind of air defense, then the drones, as we can see is happening in Ukraine, they can do a great deal of damage. So, it was looking bad for Israel, but I just don't know the extent of the damage that was done to Iran. There clearly was significant damage, especially in that first 24 hours or so. And one of the big questions was how many launchers were destroyed. And the Israelis claimed that they destroyed 200 out of 400 launchers. And I know other analysts have done like careful reviews of the photographic and the video evidence and say, no, it was maybe only 20 to 40. And so I don't know who's right. If the Israeli claims are true, then, Iran was in a tough place too. We saw they weren't sending that many missiles at the end, and maybe that was just part of a long-term strategy. I don't know. Or maybe they really were limited, because, they didn't have many launchers, and the Israelis were, just had their drones in the sky, looking for any launcher that might be preparing to, a launch and getting them. They were, these are technical questions that we just don't have a clear answer to. We hear there are conflicting claims. I know that within Iran, a lot of people feel that they should not have called it off, that they had Israel on the ropes, and
Right,
it may very
right.
well be true.
That's how I feel like a lot of the world feels, and I know it's not our position to say,
Right.
but it just felt like, okay, Iran, if you're able to keep this up, this pressure on Israel for another month, let's say, they would have to just surrender, right? They couldn't,
Yeah.
and then
Right.
this whole thing could be over. That's what I think everybody's hoping for. Just
Yeah. Well,
everybody's just tense. It's just waiting. It's like we need this to end. This Gaza thing is just going nonstop. Then we just have Syria. We have bombings in Lebanon. It's just like this has to
no,
stop.
it is a horror show. I agree. I guess the other thing though that Iran had to consider was the possibility that the U.S. would come in a major way on Israel's side. There was that attack on the nuclear facilities. And by the way, I think I saw a report this morning, I believe it was from NBC News, that U.S. intelligence has assessed that only one of the three facilities was destroyed. They didn't name which one, but I'm guessing it would be Natanz, because that was it did have underground facilities, but they weren't very deep. They were much deeper right now, what is it? I'm forgetting the name of it. It's a very Fordo. Yeah, Fordo.
Yeah.
And then the other one was
Isfahan's.
thank you. I'm sorry. Yeah, but both of those had much deeper facilities. They went, and so it's probably those two, Isfahan and Fordo, that survived. So anyway, that was just that one attack, and the fear is that the U.S., if Israel was really starting to lose, and this is the problem, there would be tremendous pressure within the U.S. among all the Israel firsters. You can't let Israel be defeated in a war, and then the U.S. would go in a big way. Now, it's possible that the U.S., because they're dependent on their Navy and these very vulnerable bases, in the end they could suffer some serious losses and could even lose the war, because these ships and these bases are so vulnerable. It's possible. It's not certain, but I think in any case there would be very significant damage, so they're reluctant. But they still might have done it. And even if Iran won, well, it would have been, they would have suffered terribly. You're just looking at the destruction of much of Iran. I think there's no question about it. And so, you can't really ask a government to take that risk. And I think that was one thing they were looking at. And then there's always in the background the possibility of nuclear weapons. We all know that Israel has at least 90 of these. And if it looks like they're going to lose, and the U.S. is not coming to their aid, they might very well use them.
Yeah, I just feel like that's where this is headed. What happens if they use them?
Yeah. Well, if you'd asked me that question a couple of years ago, I would say that the whole world would respond in horror, and Israel would just be condemned even by the U.S. But it's just that we've gone so far down this genocide road that I'm just not sure about that. I just wonder if the establishment in the West would just again excuse Israel. I mean, they excuse this completely unprovoked attack on Iran, this clear violation of the NPT, the assassination of the scientists. If anything, most of the people like Mertz just celebrated it, right? And I don't know. I could see Mertz, at least making excuses, and Donald Trump too, making excuses for Israel. But it would clearly very seriously damage an already very seriously damaged reputation. And I think there clearly would be serious consequences. They may not be immediate. Again, the usual. Their sponsors, Western Europe, well, let's say Europe and the U.S. would continue to protect them in the short run. But I think even like the people of Europe would be horrified, and I think that could very well lead to the fall of governments that were protecting Israel. I would hope so. I've been disappointed in the past, but I would hope so. I would think so.
Do we know the state of Iran's air defense now?
We don't. We really don't. We don't. There are all kinds of rumors about what's going on. Maybe they're getting systems from Russia, maybe from China, maybe from both, maybe from neither. We just don't know.
Yeah,
like we didn't know in the past. That's one of the things. These are the big unknowns, and they're probably not going to announce it to anybody. So maybe they've already made the deals, and it probably takes time. So I don't know that any of these systems are being set up yet, but maybe they will in the near future.
Do you think there's some kind of just coordination between Iran and Russia, China as well, potentially just saying that really Russia's doing the heavy work in terms of attriting the West? And, Israel's been attrited to some extent via the Houthis, Iran, and Hezbollah with all those rockets. And there's just this idea, okay, maybe now's not the right time, but we wait till basically the West is completely on empty. I mean, the fuel tank has got to be pretty low right now in the U.S. So it just feels like we're coming close to a point where the hard realities are going to slap us in the face. And then once that's true, like all of a sudden, like we're just out of interceptors, or we just have just a smattering, to defend some basic stuff. Then it's over, right? Then
clearly we're very close to that already. I mean, there was that statement that the Pentagon made, and then there've been these attempts to walk it back. But I think that the reality is reality. What was it again? Trump offered 10 interceptors, which is not even enough for one night. It's for one launcher to deal with just 3 missiles or something in a night, and then it's over. So it's just the fact that he could just offer them 10 tells you how desperate the situation is. We're already in a real fix.
Well, the West has gotten, it's becoming more and more apparent, I think, to the BRICS countries, the global South, how weak it's becoming in its vulnerability. So it's just, there has to be at a point, even though we're getting weaker and weaker, we're still being the aggressor. If we talk about, just Israel and the United States, that at some point, won't these countries just look at them and say, okay, now we can just push you over? like that, but that's what has to happen, right? I mean, eventually, or push back, so it's. Yeah. Well, I guess that's why I'm kind of frustrated with Iran. It's just,
Well, I'm sure they're making all these calculations. Now, there's just a lot of question about the leadership in Iran. It seemed like, again, it was clear that that Pezeshkian has been terribly naive. I'm not accusing him. I don't think anybody's accusing him of being a traitor, but he's just been very, very naive. Now, hopefully that naivete has ended. But a lot of people feel, I think in part based on his recent, actually, Tucker Carlson interview, he just comes across as not the right guy for Iran at this time. He's not a wartime president. He's like a Neville Chamberlain, who's not a bad guy, and rather than a Winston Churchill. And they need their Winston Churchill in charge at this time. So I don't know. I think he's woken up to a great extent, and he's been told in no uncertain terms, because his power is limited. It's limited by the RGC and by the supreme leader. That no, we're not pursuing this policy anymore. This, and just today, I think it was that they came out finally with a crystal clear statement on the negotiations. There seemed to be some sort of waffling that enough ambiguity from Iran to cause people to think that, maybe these guys are actually going to go back to the negotiating table after this. That's just crazy. Well, I think it was just today again that they stated that the preconditions for further negotiations would be that discussions on actually more than discussions, but actually denuclearization of Israel, and also a statement of guilt, reparations, the kind of very, very strong requirements. And, and the kind of requirements that just possibly can't be accepted. They should be. I mean, they have the moral case, Iran does, but they're just not going to be accepted by Israel and America. So, in other words, they're saying no negotiations. And that's a sign that if there was still a remnant of the Western-leaning faction within Iran, it has been thoroughly defeated. Now, Iran has a very, very complicated government with lots of checks and balances. This notion that it's some sort of, totalitarian dictatorship or something, the way it's often described in the West, is nonsense. There's almost an excess of democracy through various different kinds of institutions, and it's hard to get everybody on the same page. And that, I think, maybe in part explains why they weren't really prepared for this attack, the surprise attack by Israel. But the result of that attack is that they have been unified, and the realists, let's call them, have won. And I think that, and if that's true, it appears to be true, they will be prepared for the next attack, and things will be different.
Yeah, but it seems silly to me that you have this country that does this sneak attack, this very dastardly act, this heinous act, and then starts this war, and then they can't take the heat once they start getting hit back, and they call for a ceasefire, and this country agrees to it, and then everybody knows, well, okay, now it's stopped, until he hits us again.
Yeah.
Like, what is that? That's not, it just doesn't make sense to me. Just like, why would Iran engage in this? Like,
right. Well, again,
I know
they were hurt. Let's not deny it. They were hurt badly, especially in the first day or two there. And then second, there was a fear, and I think a very legitimate one, of the U.S. coming in on the side of Israel, and not in a limited fashion, but, in a full-scale fashion, joining the regime change operation. And then there's always the problem of, the nuclear terror. That's Israel's nuclear arsenal. So they did have, it's not such an easy thing. It's very, I understand, I say, why don't they fight? Israel needs to be taught a lesson, but it's teaching them. I think they have. It was a partial lesson. We hope that it
doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, well, it's true. As I've mentioned in Israel, and now I think it's largely, or in great part, a result of military censorship there. If you read the papers again, I guess I've been reading left-wing Haaretz, so that's the one where you would think you would find some sort of criticism of the attack on Iran, and maybe kind of a more of a realistic assessment. But in general, and maybe this is just the result of just outright military censorship. It's just like, oh, this was a great victory for us. This was a great victory to us. That's the line that you'll hear from all Israeli leaders and throughout the media. Now, it may be that citizens are looking at, this devastated block in Tel Aviv and saying, well, I don't know how great this victory really was, but there is, a very concerted effort to portray this as a victory. And, unfortunately, that may lay the groundwork for another attack.
Yeah, I just don't understand why Iran would just sit around and I know they're going to prepare their air defenses, do what they want, but it's just like everybody knows that we have to wait for Israel to do something to Iran for this to start back up. Because it doesn't seem, because Iran won't hit first, even though they were, surprise attacked and everything. There's been no official ceasefire document. It's just something kind of stated by Trump, and then everybody said, okay, but there's not, as far as we're concerned, I mean, the United States bombed Iran. we are technically kind of at war with Iran. That's an act of war right there
Oh,
that
sure.
we've committed. And Israel and Iran are still at war, but we're just pretending like everything's so normal, and we're just going to wait for the U.S. and Israel to concoct some type of plan to hit Iran again and just wait. They're going to wait for the opportune moment. They're just going to sit around and wait for this to happen. I guess
Yeah,
so.
I think so. I mean, I think Iran would be justified in launching a surprise attack against Israel, because this is the reality. They were attacked. They have every reason to expect another surprise attack. Why don't you actually seize the initiative? The problem is, again, it probably would provoke very quickly an American intervention, and they just have to consider this.
Israel's gone so rogue. It's really hard to kind of understand. I think
Yeah.
I
Right.
don't
I
know if
mean, people.
we're getting.
Yeah. The thing is, like, Israel's had its supporters for, of course, for decades. Especially since the 1960s. There's been a very strong, pro-Zionist faction within the U.S. government, and it's become dominant. It's been dominant for a long time, but it was it there was at least some caution and some restraint in past years. Sometimes Israel went too far, and Israel got criticized, and Israel had to pull back. That happened in Lebanon. Certain you know incidents that we wouldn't even think about now because they just occur on a daily basis, but they shocked people back then. There was a shelling of a town, that killed many civilians, but it's just like a day's work in Gaza. And nobody even notices it anymore. But it was shocked people, and the Israelis had to, actually had to do something. They had to pull back. They had to apologize, or, conduct a real investigation. That's just gone. It's just like, I think people think this is normal, but this support that for Israel and Israel's behavior now is not normal, not even for Israel. It's something like it has been. You could see, people who followed Israel closely always knew those demons were there. And you could see them in a lot of ugly incidents over the years. But they were kind of spaced, they didn't, they, they would do terrible things, but then they would, they would work hard to cover it up and present it as some sort of just, innocent mistake. And then it would go on from there. And then, they would kill Palestinians, they would seize their land, but they would do it in increments. And, and it was just generally not noticed. Now that's just caution has been thrown to the winds, and one of the horrible things is in this country and in Europe, it's just so many people, especially in the government, are they don't protest anymore. I mean, they have gone completely. You say Israel has gone rogue, and they've just kind of and they have gone with them. They have any sort of conscience or that they displayed in the past is just gone. It's just total unconditional support for any action by Israel. Now, again, we started to get a little bit of criticism, during the deliberate starvation, which has been partially relieved. I think in part Israel got realized there were people, and there are people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich that just wanted to starve them all to death right then. But then I think there were enough people like Netanyahu who understood that, hey, this is starting to hurt us, and it really could if we just starve them to death all right now. And so they pulled back, and they're still starving. I mean, they're just not getting enough food, but just enough to keep them alive. You can keep people alive in a weakened condition for a long, long time with, limited food.
I just don't understand how the world lets this happen, how this has been going on so long. And, there's still people there's many people out there that just still say, like, I stand with Israel no matter what, can't criticize Israel. And you're just wondering, what is that person? Like, why are they so? I mean, they have to realize that there's something going on. I mean, even if you're not seeing the videos coming out of Gaza, but I mean, just like, the surprise attack on Iran, or if you're going down the Epstein case, the APAC, the undue influence, just how strange it is that all of our politicians are saying, yeah, we got to stand with Israel, stand with Israel. And people are like, well, let's talk about America. Like it's just, I just don't understand what's up with all those people. How are they so captured? I think they're becoming a minority and they're being singled out. I think they are starting to band together because they're becoming a smaller and smaller voice, and maybe they're getting a bit more reckless. But I mean, basically, this is like it's like becomes the badge over time. It's the way this is moving that this will be something that people will sort of insinuate like, okay, that's like the equivalent of being a member of the Nazi party back in 1939 or 1940s. Like that's what this is saying. If you keep on saying like, oh, I'm just going to defend Israel no matter what on what it's doing, like that, I don't understand why is there. Are they not able to break out of that? Is it compromise? What's the psychology behind something like that?
Well, yeah, I'll just point to, maybe you didn't notice, but we had our picnic yesterday. And on
I did notice.
You did notice. It was
the church?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I had noticed it on a previous trip up there. But yeah, they had a sign out front, "We stand with Israel." And that's part of it. Now these people aren't compromised; they just really believe. Their theology has been distorted. Again, Christian Zionism was a fringe movement up until the 60s. It was growing. Okay, you did find it in some churches, but it was certainly a minority voice. And now it's become over the last few decades, something very, very powerful. And the theology of these different churches, especially evangelical churches, has been seriously distorted, so that people think that that's part of being a good Christian. And that's very unfortunate. Again, it has no historical basis. And, we won't get into the theological arguments, but I think it's entirely unjustified, but it's there. And those people, I think you have to say many of them are sincere, and that sincere belief that they have prevents them from really opening their eyes. And they stay very firmly within the bubble where everything that Israel does is justified and is always a matter of defense. And the other people are always evil and out to destroy Israel, and they're agents of the devil or something. That's there. That's part of it. But of course, there's we don't want to overstate the power. That's not really the main source of Zionist influence. I think you need to go to the mega donors and the secular and Jewish Zionists at in the power structures, and they're there, and they can even if the population at large, and that's what the polls show, is shifting away from Israel and has a more negative view of them than they do of the Palestinians now. That just doesn't matter in the short run. I think in the long run it does. It matters a lot. But in the short run, even the medium term, it doesn't matter. The people who have their hands on the levers of power are committed Zionists.
Yeah, I just feel like it's just this deluge of negative PR for Israel because of all the atrocities they're committing. It's just, you can't hide from it. Just people are becoming aware slowly, bit by bit. They might have just heard one story here, one story there, but it's enough out there that I think it's permeating everybody's consciousness now. I mean, like even Mike Huckabe tweeted out saying, condemned the killing of an American citizen in the West Bank. This 20-year-old boy, Saif, was beaten to death by Israeli settlers, beaten to death and then they blocked any ambulances or anything coming to rescue him for 3 hours, just bleeding out. That's what.
That's what happens there. That's the thing. That's a daily story. Occasionally, because he's an American, Mike Huckabee heard about it, and some other Americans heard about it. But that's just what happens on a daily basis in the West Bank, which we don't even talk about because it's so much worse than Gaza. But yeah, I think there's no question that it is getting through slowly, and there will be a tipping point. And especially getting through to younger people who are, spend a lot more time on social media and are therefore exposed to these stories, these facts. Now it's probably more the older people who just watch Fox News and really don't have other sources of information. They're well insulated. I mean, if they were thinking, even then, I believe me, I think if you really were a thinking person and looking at, consuming information critically, and you just had Fox News, you would start to think, hey, this isn't adding up. I'm just thinking about my own case. Like I used to just watch mainstream news, and I was seeing these reports on Palestine, and I say, wait a second, this just doesn't add up. And then that forced me to go or led me to doing further research. This is decades ago. But most people don't do that. They're just passive consumers of news, and like these older people who, let's just watch Fox News, but it doesn't have to be Fox News, CNN, or whatever. They're just there is one narrative, and they trust it, and they trust it uncritically, and so their positions just don't change. But it's by and large, it's not true of younger people. I mean, there's a different media landscape, and it is getting through to them. So we see all across the political spectrum, there has been a dramatic shift away from Israel among younger people.
Right. I don't know if you've seen this term being going around, just people saying, "Oh, I'm doing a lot of noticing." People are noticing. So I think what we're experiencing, we've used the term like people are having an awakening, but I like the term the Great Noticing. We had the Great Awakening before, but now what we're in the middle of right now is this Great Noticing. And noticing is just noticing that, hey, there's something strange going on in this relationship between Israel and the United States. And there's a lot of manipulation. There's something going on with this corruption. We got the Epstein pedophile thing. But it's just noticing that there's just such an evil force out there that is manipulating narratives, manipulating our realities. And it's like, but now we were becoming aware of it, that we've been lied to about so many things in our life. We've been lied to about all these wars in the Middle East. We've been lied to about Israel. We've been just everything, we can go all the way back World War II, whatever. But now it's like we woke up from the Matrix. People are getting unplugged, and right. There's going to be that's where we're at. And so it's just it's a scary time, but a very exciting time, because I'm seeing it just this in real time, people waking up and like, something's messed up. Like I told you right before this podcast, I watched that interview with Tucker Carlson and Daryl Cooper. And it's something I think everybody should listen to. I mean, when people listen to this story of Epstein, and just this is, Daryl Cooper doesn't go into speculation. He just lays out the facts. Everything's verifiable. It's just unbelievable how evil this whole thing is, and just how everything we've been told about our country being the greatest nation. It's like, I have this revulsion now of my country. And I think a lot of people are starting to experience that. I don't want to put all the blame on Israel. A lot of it is our own complicity and our willingness to do these things. But we can, it's the intelligence agencies in general are kind of, that's one thing that Daryl Cooper was saying. It's not so much that we shouldn't just frame it as like, oh, it's a Mossad agent. He was kind of a freelancer that was being used by the CIA, by Mossad, by MI6, so.
They often work together, yeah.
Right. So, we don't want to just frame it all just like this is, but the whole thing, this evil cabal, and it's all part of the world that we were celebrating, the Western world, this great civilization, freedom and democracy, all this thing. And it's all ripping apart at the seams for me. It's just all like, everything's just been everything's been a lie. And I don't, as this great noticing continues to accelerate, I'm just waiting for the revolution. I'm waiting for the break, because this will break America. I'm certain of it. Well, it is breaking America. It is breaking the West. All these wars, but it's more than that. It's just this deep state. We began to realize, okay, yeah, the deep state, yeah, it's a real thing. But then you just started to realize just how evil the deep state is. And then it's just like, this is our country. Like we allowed this, we somehow did, that just how many people are complicit in this, and all the mental gymnastics they must have done to convince themselves that, oh, we're doing the right thing, that we're somehow on the right, that it's okay if we, blackmail people with pedophilia or whatever it is, anything, just the most disgusting things, or let's starve 1 million people to death, bomb this country, do this, It's just it's just evil. It's just evil, and I don't know how to really handle it. I don't know how the country's going to handle it. I don't know how everybody in the world is going to handle it.
Yeah. Well, one thing, I think you're right. There is this great noticing. It still has a ways to go, but it is real. Again, the full polls reflect this fact. Yeah, the problem is like you can have an entire populace that, let's say, yeah, wakens up to a reality, opposes something that's going on, and yet nothing will change. And that is because in the end, you need to have organized power to make a difference. That's just the way it is. That's a fact. Just sort of like a general sentiment. Okay, great. That can be the building material for organized power. But if you don't have organized power, nothing changes. The people that are organized and have the power will continue to control policy. And that's what we see. We see it in our country and we see it in Europe as well. So you need alternatives. Trump presented himself as an alternative and maybe even had some real intentions of being an alternative. But he is clearly, with some exceptions, has clearly failed to do that and has been co-opted, and it's been a great disappointment. I think a lot of people didn't wake up into the fact until this Epstein scandal, and that seems to be what, for me, it's one of the lesser evils. I mean, I'm not saying it's not. Maybe I don't know. I'll listen to that interview.
Listen to it. I mean,
I will. Okay, I may change my mind on that. But I mean, there was enough to be outraged already that you didn't need an additional scandal, and those other things should have woken up more people to what was going on. But this, for whatever reason, I can understand why, has really reached people and has reached Trump's base and is really hurting him, and may just tear apart the whole MAGA movement. And that's probably good, because I think, again, I've always argued that Trump is somebody who, put himself out there as a real alternative. And, maybe there was a kernel of truth to that. But in the end, he's just incapable of following through and just didn't have the moral courage or the principles or the intellectual understanding to really carry through on that. So he's been sort of a false messiah. And we need politicians and maybe a whole new political party that can really, when they finally seize the reins of power, they can make a real difference. We're just not going to see a real difference under Donald Trump, I'm afraid.
I mean, he's compromised, and what this is the problem is that I feel like so many people are compromised within our government that are at least associated with the evils of the deep state. You become part of it, and it affects you. And then once the light is being shown on it, I think these people, they know they have to band together, and they have all the power, they have all the money. So, they might be more brash, more irrational now. They know that this is it. We gotta clamp down. We gotta go full authoritarian, or we just gotta start World War III. I just don't like the fact that there might be some satanic pedophile cabal that's going to start World War III, and we're the ones that are underneath the rule of these people.
Yeah, well, what can I say? But the power is corrupting. I think this is something I think I made the point last time too. It's just that there are all kinds of populist candidates, but when they get into power, they're surrounded by all these people, and if they have any sort of insecurity or some sort of gap in their understanding, these people know how to play them, and in the end, make them a part of the team that rules. And that's what you see again and again. Those people that withstand all those pressures are really very rare. And I named some of them. You find some of them on the left, like Dennis Kucinich is one example. But then you find like these libertarians like Ron Paul and Thomas Massey. There are other examples, but they're very rare. They're very rare. Sometimes Thomas Massey is just one guy against the whole House of Representatives. And most people, they get there and they're told, they already have these insecurities, they're worried about being reelected, and they say, well, this is what you got to do. You got to take this money. You got to work with these people, and by and large, that's what happens. Whatever statements they made during the campaign, when they get into the club, they become members of the club. And now there may be one day where that just isn't true. You need some strong individuals. history, there's this great man view of history, which, is poo-pooed often. But individuals, an extraordinary individual really can make a difference in certain, in these times of crisis, can lead the country, one way rather than another. So we need some extraordinary individuals, and I think we have, like we're saying, there is this great noticing. There are people that are ready to serve somebody like that who really does understanding that we could have a new party, a new movement. We're just, we don't see it right now. We see the current parties really just falling apart and becoming increasingly unpopular. The polls show that Trump is a very unpopular president. But when you ask, what the let's say the potential voter thinks about the Democrats, they give them even lower scores. So there is just a general crisis of legitimacy, and that's an opportunity for some new movement. But we don't see it yet.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about Elon Musk's America Party.
Yeah,
yeah,
and he's been a committed Zionist. Let's be honest.
Yeah, that's true. Although he did, I don't know, he's gone a bit rogue recently. Who knows? Well, we need a new leader, Dad. What do you think about the position? You want to?
No, I'm just not cut out for that. I'll comment from the sidelines and do my part in that way.
I just the whole thing just needs to burn to the ground. This whole government. It's so I'm really at that point. It's just I can't believe how I just remember how I felt about America when I was a kid, and how I feel about it now. It's just a night and day difference, and I think many people are coming to the same realization I'm coming to, and just this revulsion of our political leaders, our elite, our deep state, our intelligence agencies, the undue influence of our lobbies in Israel.
Right. Well, let's be honest. I mean, we were a very successful country, like especially in my youth in the 1960s, and we're the envy of the world for a reason. I mean, life really was very good, and it still is good, but I think we all feel it's on a downward trajectory. So, there was a reason to be very proud of being an American, and just I remember that. I think there was a better time. There always have been problems, and probably we weren't aware of them as we should have been, but it was a better time. But now, we're entering very, very dark times.
Okay, well, let's end it there. Okay, well, on Monday you are flying out to Russia, so we probably won't do an episode then. Maybe we do one Sunday. We'll see how the news plays out, or we'll do it when you land. Okay, well, I'll see you over the weekend. Have a great rest of your day. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Talk to you later.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.